So a few things about setting keyframes and getting things like registration happening with character animation. When you work with a character, there are several ways that people like to work. Some people like to animate bit by bit. So they'll animate a foot, or they'll animate just the pelvis, or they'll animate just the knees, and that's their particular way of thinking about the world. Some people who have come from a background where they are traditionally drawing, so a 2D animator, likes to think about the entire thing as one entity. So it's not, they can't think about the pelvis by itself, the knees by itself, and the feet by itself. They have to think about the entire pose as one thing. So that's a holistic approach to setting up a pose. And then there's something in between the two, where you can think about the pose but still work on the individual parts. I myself, I'm one of those halfway people. I like to think about the pose but then think about the parts after I've thought about the pose. Either way, probably at this stage of the game, the best thing that you can possibly do to start off with is to set a keyframe on everything. So the way that we do that is we first of all have to select everything. And when I say select everything, I mean select everything that is a controller, not a pelvis, not a joint, not anything else. Generally, if a rig is set up well, you should just be able to select everything without having to set or modify anything. Look that there's no hidden surprises inside there. Normally what is selectable should only be the controllers. As a word of caution, that's not always the case. A lot of people will not have those things hidden. This is well done, this rig, so I'm not too concerned about that. But if you were concerned about only selecting controllers, what you can do is use this part of Maya up the top here. See, they've got these buttons with a plus, a bone, or a curve, a surface, a deformer, dynamics, renders, and question marks, miscellaneous. These things are called pick masks. And the idea behind a pick mask is that if you want to select a particular type of object, so if I had created, say, a sphere, which is a NURB sphere, or I created a light, that's my light here, and other sorts of objects, I created a camera, you'd have, these are different classes of objects, and at the moment I can select quite happily anything, because it's possible to select any kind of object. And normally in a complex scene environment, you would not just have your character. You would have the set, you would have the lighting, you would have cameras and all sorts of other things which are not related specifically to your character animation. So even though this character is set up well for this situation, I would encourage you to use these things called pick masks. The idea behind the pick mask is that when they are depressed, you'll see that there's a highlighted region around the back of them, which means that that particular type of object can be selected. So I can select cameras, and I can select lights, and I can select curves, and I can select surfaces. On the far left-hand side of these pick masks is a toggle to switch everything off. So notice all the highlight has disappeared from behind these buttons, and I can't select anything at all. Nothing. So the only way that I can enable that is to look at the type that I've got here. So this one here is joints, this one here is curves. If you don't know what it is, you can right click on it and it tells you what things fall under that category. So if I wanted to select a surface, this one here covers NURB surfaces, polysurfaces, subdivisions, planes. That's a full category of surfaces. So now I can select surfaces, but I can't select cameras, I can't select curves. If I was working in a lighting workflow when all the animation had been done and it wasn't my place to touch the stuff anymore, I would go in here and choose either all of them, which covers lights, cameras and textures. So I could now select a camera or a light, or if the cameras were locked down and it wasn't my position to do anything, I can right click and just choose a subset, just lights. So now it turns orange in the background, meaning that I can't, there's a subset of even within that group. So now I can select lights, but not cameras. The reason I'm showing you this is that when we're animating, the only thing that we really need to be able to select are curves. So you see that curve object there? Well, that's selected. I can only really select controllers. I can't select anything else in my scene. So you can have a wonderful, complicated scene and know that whatever I'm selecting will only ever be a controller of a character. So, as I said, this character is set up well, so it's not really a concern. But as you move forward, this is a technique which is really going to save your mind from exploding. So I'll get rid of these things now. And we'll talk about a few little survival tips on getting this happening. The first survival tip is to have the right frame rate. Whenever we animate, step number one, always think about the outcome. Don't think about the outcome when you've finished and polished the animation. It's all perfect and thing. Now, let's put it to DVD, and you realize that the DVD has a frame rate of 25 frames per second. You've been animating at 30 frames a second, and it looks bad because it's all choppy, because it doesn't fit together. Or you end up having the wrong speed of animation because you've had to slow things down or speed things up to make the right. Point is, you need to know what your desired platform will be. If you're just putting something on the internet, don't worry, whatever format, whatever frame rate pops out. Maya's default frame rate is film, which is based upon the projection frame rate in a standard celluloid cinema, where they would have your reams of film, and there would be 24 of them, which would be pulled in front of the lens for every second. So as you see that noise of the projector, that's shooting past at 24 little pictures per second. If you are going to prepare your stuff to put on TV or to display on video, if you wanted to put it on a DVD to look on a television in Australia, then you'd have to change it. Now, let me just quickly show you how I did that, because I wasn't really doing it properly. When you open up this pizza box thing down here next to the key, that's the animation preferences, you'll be taken to this tab. Now this same thing can be accessed through Windows preferences, the same window. The only difference is it goes specifically to the preferences of the time slider, because that's something that gets changed quite a bit. Now, as I go to this playback speed, if you drop that down, it's got the option of doing real time, half of real time. Sometimes you need to see things a bit slower just to see what's going on if they're quite fast animation, or whatever. There's all sorts of reasons. Sometimes when I'm doing lip sync, I go other and I take it to 3 frames a second. I can change that to whatever I want so that it goes even slower still. It's entirely up to you as to how fast that goes, but the actual concept of how long is 1 second isn't defined here. It's defined up in this other section at the top here where it says animation. Settings. Whoops, see, it's too many things for me to remember. Settings, and you can see here that's the definition of what time is. Here it's listed as film, 25 frames a second. If you're doing a game animation, you would go for 15 frames a second. If it's an Australian or PAL country, what do you know what?
Home-based and NTSC.
NTSC, okay, so you're 30 frames a second. 25 frames per second in, say, France, Spain, most European countries and Australia. Japan, US, South America, I'm not sure how much of South America has that, but is the other format. And that's, as I said, largely to do with electricity. Where you have a 60 hertz electricity supply for the AC current, then you halve that as 30. In Australia, we have 50 hertz current.
Also, America is the same then.
Yeah.
Because we can use the different things. But for example, from Spain,
Yeah.
you cannot use a console, video games console in Latin America.
Okay.
For the thing, because
I think that might,
the power and stuff.
yeah, I'd have to check up on that. I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure in Spain they have, there's the two formats. One's called PAL, one's called CCAM, and they're pretty much the same. The CCAM's kind of died a bit.
And they work with the NTCS.
NTSC
Yeah. They
is 30 frames a second, and that's based upon not so much the voltage but the current frequency. So if you look at your
No, I
current,
mean they work. They turn on or good. The flick of the image that they give.
well, that's because it's not the standard then. Yeah, the flicker, any kind of flicker you're getting means that you're on the wrong standard. So anyway, that's where we'd set it. So if we wanted to eventually, as I said, the only reason you'd ever want to change is if you wanted to create a demo reel that played on TVs in Australia. If you're not interested in creating a demo reel that plays on a television, you just want your demo reel to be on the internet will handle any kind of frame rate. Computers are sublimely versatile, at least they are at the moment. So I'll be happy to stay at 24 frames a second because we all want to work in film studios, don't we? So may as well get used to film studio environment. So now we've got here frame 1 to frame 24. Another interesting thing I've learned in the last few years is that when you have people who've come from traditional backgrounds in animation, they're very peculiar about the concept of frame 0. And they're peculiar about it because they, in their own infinitely mathematical minds, can't imagine what a 0th piece of paper would look like. They think if you have one piece of paper, that's frame 1. That's one piece of paper. Then there's a second piece of paper. Then there's a third piece of paper. You can't start with the 0th piece of paper. So they go phonetically crazy about the concept of you animating from frame 1 only. So that seems to have gone through the software to the point where the default starting frame is always frame 1. It's never frame 0. Where whenever I animate something, I always start from frame 0 because it doesn't bother me because I've got a flexible enough mind to cope with such things. So that's frame 1 to 24. What we have there is one classical cinema second. So we'd want maybe 10 seconds. So we'll just change this from 24. Actually, change the overall value to 240 down here. And I can change that also to 240, which gives me one lot of 10 seconds. So that's the first thing we need to be able to get right, is to make sure our time units are correct and that we've got enough time. And that's essentially how we do that. These things on the side here, this is the absolute beginning frame. This is the absolute end frame. This number in the middle is the beginning of the window that we're focusing on to the end of the window we're focusing on. So if we only want to focus on 24 frames, you'll see that down here, that's the beginning of my time and that's the end of my time, and then I've got this little window inside here that I can drag backwards and forwards. That window is 1 second long, but I'm just looking at different subsets of that value up to 240 on one side, down to 1 on the opposite side. So when you're animating and you want to focus on a little section, you're just going over and over that 1 second, then it's a good idea to have this window. And you can change that window by clicking on these little boxes to the side here, which allows you to increase and decrease the size of that window of focus. So you can go anything up to the full amount of 240 frames, right down to a smaller amount that you might be currently working on. So that's the two things that we need to set up before we can even lay down a keyframe. Now, the next thing that I encourage you to do when you're animating, at least I wasn't always sold on this, but I'm completely sold on it now, is to use a thing called auto keyframing. Next to where it says no character set, between the pizza box and the no character set is a little key. Click on the key and it should turn red. What that means is that from now on, whenever I move something, and here's the clause that has a keyframe on it already, it will continue to create more animations as we go forth. So if I was to select the pelvis and press S, I have a keyframe on it, and you'll see it's got a keyframe there, and I'll move to another position and I'll animate this by moving all of the stuff. You'll see that the only thing that has animated is my pelvis. The The other is just a complete discrete movement. There's no keyframe on these other parts, so they are exactly the same position as where I last moved them. Okay, so the next important thing after setting auto keyframing to learn is that we set a keyframe on everything. So if I get a marquee over the whole of everything and then press S, everything that is a curve on this entire character now has a keyframe, which means, more importantly, that if I have my character in this frame here, and then I move to, say, frame 19, and I move the pelvis a little bit, and I move the foot a little bit, then everything is remembered. Whatever I move, any part of it will be remembered. So that's another nice way of working. Now, just to throw levels of nice working at you time and time again, there's yet another thing I like to do which makes my workflow a lot easier because I get forgetful. You'll notice that whenever I select an object, it shows up the keyframes on the timeline, and they've got ticks there. Anything that has an animation to it has a tick next to it. So this one only has one keyframe at frame 1. This one has 2 keyframes, one at frame 1, one at frame 18. So everything has a different number of keyframes. And that can be good and that can be troublesome because I may think that I've got this wonderful pose over here, but I forgot to animate the pelvis, so most of it works, but the pelvis wasn't keyed, so the pelvis doesn't hit the same position at that same time, so the whole pose is broken. If you really want to create an environment which is exactly the same as drawing, where whatever you do to that character at that particular pose is maintained, you can use a thing called a character set. And a character set is something like a bucket, where instead of saying, I need to think about my pelvis, my knees, my feet, my ankles, the ball of my foot, and everything else that's going on, and make sure that I've gone through every single frame that I want to animate, and I set a keyframe on it, you can either just continuously remember that, say when you get to frame 18, one way of working is just to select everything every single time that you want to set a pose and always press S on everything so that every single part has that same particular pose. That's one way you can work. And a lot of animators do prefer to work this way. They'll select everything. They make sure that whenever they set a pose, the last thing they do before they change time, because as soon as you change time, you lose your pose. So the last thing that they'll do is to, and a lot of people do this, they'll create on the shelf here, there's a thing at the end of the shelf called custom. And one of and this is all the way to the top, a lot of people do this, especially people who are not very technically minded. They will select all of the curves like this. I'll clear everything so you can see it. What we're showing here is the script editor. So whatever I do in Maya, always in the background gets spit out as a bunch of commands because Maya is essentially a command line tool. So just below the pizza box is this little chest of drawers here. And this little chest of drawers is called the script editor. And everything that I do, if I select the pelvis, it comes up with a code saying select pelvis. If I select the main root, it gives you the main root. If I select, let me clear everything here. If I select everything, it gives me a line, and I don't need to understand it because it's a whole line, and in that one line, it's giving me the code for selecting everything of the character. Now this is the thing that this is going to be a real time saver, is that you can use this button here, this little button with a little red arrow on it, and what it does is it will create a button on this shelf here. So I'll just call this one all. selected as a Mel script. And now, whenever I want to select everything in my character, I click on this and it does that. It repeats that command. And that works with anything, by the way, in Maya. If you've got a list of things that you want to do, like a batch, there's a procedure that you're repeating over and over and over and over again, you can open up your script editor, do it, select the code that's related to it, and then save it as a little batch file. And then it'll just do it over and over again. It's a great way of speeding up your workflow. So that's another way of doing it. And the next way after that is to use a thing called a character set. Now, as I said before, a character set is kind of like a bucket. It's a container which contains all of the animations that you've done so far. And the main advantage of using a character set over this select and animate is that I don't see my keyframes unless I've got something selected. As soon as I deselect something, I've got no idea where my frames are. The only way I can find out where my frames are is to select something, and then I see the keyframes down the bottom. The nice thing about a character set is that if I was to select everything that's here, and there's a menu at the top here saying character, create character set, and I'll just call it walker or step, and just use anything which is keyable and create a character set. What I get now is this little, just next to the pizza box and the key, it now says step, and that's a list of what are called characters in our scene. And it's just a quick way of focusing on the work related to one character only. So notice that when I deselect everything, my keyframes remain, which means that I can sit here and see where my animation's going. And if I wanted to modify something about my animation, I don't need to select it. All I need to do is just go into here and move it across to there, and then I've retimed my animation. I don't have to select my character. So that's for me in any case. Some people hate this. Some people really, really hate this because they feel that it's adding a little extra bug in there, or a little gremlin which is doing things and I don't really understand what it's doing, and so they just avoid it like the plague. I personally like to have things which work with my brain. I've recorded a whole ton of things. Hopefully, if this is of interest to you, you're going to go over this again in your own time. But they're the main things I like to have set up before I start to animate. So now that we're at the position we're starting to animate, the best way, let's just talk about registration. If I was to do that thing where we have our character taking a step to one side, we would have our first frame, and because I'm using a character set, all I need to do is press S and everything in the character set automatically gets a keyframe. I don't need to think. One of the ways that you can animate is to just go to another frame like that, say frame 10, and think, now what's the first thing that I thought about when I was animating before I start to make this step? And I thought, well, I thought maybe there was a bit of a shift to one side, and let me just change into gimbal. Maybe a shift in the hips a little bit, and let's just take the weight off the knees a little bit. So there's a bit of an anticipation, and I might do something with the foot as well. Let's just think if I was about to take a step at that moment, I might also do something with my foot. So you've got here, let's have a look, is it foot tilt? No, the tilt doesn't do it. Heel ball, that'll do. Okay, so there's something of an anticipation, and I might also ball swivel. No, ball swivel's not good. So there's a bit of an anticipation on the foot, that the foot is lifting off the ground. I'd actually like something a little bit better than that. Is that not a roll? Let's get to know this a bit better. Okay, so I might lift the foot off the ground a little bit, and I also might rotate the foot a little bit in anticipation. So already from here to here, I'm kind of lifting my foot and thinking about what's going to happen next. So I'm not just thinking about the weight shift in my pelvis, but I'm also thinking about what it is, what's happening to maintain my balance. So another thing that's happening as well is that I'm moving my weight so that it's being supported by that foot, but in order to do that, I need to shift my weight to the side. So I've done several subtle little things. I've shifted the pelvis to the left, to the screen left. I've tilted the pelvis up to allow that leg to lift up a little bit. I've lifted the foot off the ground a little bit, twisted it a little bit, and done a few things to make it maybe even just to... It's always a good idea as well when you're animating, don't leave a single controller untouched. So here I've done something with the knee. I might just move this knee a little bit. This one's getting a bit more weight. I might move that knee a little bit so that I feel a bit more of that weight. I might just shift this down a little bit so I can feel some of the weight coming to that knee and maybe move the knee a little bit. So everything that's there has had some kind of movement put into it. And I might even grab this one here and just do a little bit with the foot as well. What can we do? I might push the toe in a little bit so it feels like there's a little bit of weight being taken by that foot. And, okay, now here's an interesting learning point. I've done a classic animation fumbly thing. I'm animating from frame 1 to frame 10, frame 1 to frame 10 to get my two different poses. And I've just danced off the 10 to frame 12. So now all of my stuff that I've been doing has been set on frame 12, but if I go back to frame 10, it disappears, but some of it's on frame 12, some of it's on frame 10. So I really want to have what I've achieved in frame 12, but I've stuffed it up. It really should be on frame 10. Here's one of the biggest tips you'll learn in animation. It's called, it's copying keys, but it's copying keys in a way which is completely unlike anything you would ever imagine done before. A lot of people who come from other software backgrounds, they think, well, copying is about going Control-C or Command-C and Command-V, and they try to find the Command-C and Command-V for keys. And there is one, but I tell you what, it's pretty awful. The best and easiest way to copy anything from anywhere in Maya is to use what are called, they call it copy pairs, but when you press your left mouse button on the timeline and move around, you're changing time. You change time. But when you use your middle mouse button, the scroll wheel, watch what happens. If I go with my left mouse button from 10 to 1, the animation changes. If I press down the scroll wheel, 10 to 1, nothing changes. Nothing changes. Okay, this is the trick, because the idea is that if I have that current state, but I've moved to a different time, all I need to do is press S now, and it will overwrite the previous animation to what's currently seen on the screen. I don't want to do that because I don't want to lose my first pose, but hey, why can't I do it here? I'm on frame 12, I really want what's on frame 12 to occur in frame 10. If I use my left mouse button to jump back, it moves and animates back to what it was in frame 10. So here I can press down my middle mouse button and drag it back to 10, and my animation hasn't changed. And the magic button, S, I now have the same frame on frame 12 as I do on frame 10. Okay, so now I can delete that frame 12, right click, delete, and we're back to normal. So that's going to happen a lot when you animate. So I've taught that to you. If you forget it or run into it as you're animating, go back to the video and find out what it was so you can remember how to do that again. So we're going through this, and again, when we're planning out our animation, I'm thinking about the way that the body moves through space. I'm not thinking about my spacing per se, I'm not thinking about my timing. I'm just thinking about the mechanics of the movement. When we get on later to when you finish an animation, then you'll start to think, well, yes, we move from A to B, and we move from A to B in this particular way, but the spacing and timing will only come in when you say, well, exactly how do we move from A to B? What kind of movement is it? Is it an ease in? Is it an ease out? Is it a linear movement? Is it a heavy movement? Those sorts of things are what creates good animation. But we don't get good animation if we don't have good mechanics underneath it. So here we've thought about that movement, and a good way to plan things is to say, well, I'll go to another frame, say frame 20, and think, well, what's going to happen now? I want my foot to now reach out to the side a bit, so I'll start with the most important movement. So I'll have this foot reaching out to the side, and I'll not forget to always go back to my reference. So if I was reaching out to the side and I was doing that, what am I doing? And I'm looking here that my leg is in one pointed line and my foot is lined up with my knee, is lined up with everything else. So you see how easily the computer completely stuffs up the mechanics of a leg. What we want to do is to make sure that that leg doesn't lose its important mechanical shape. We always want to have the relationship between the direction that the leg is pointing, the direction that the knee is pointing, and the direction that the foot is pointing. So that when we, let's just turn some of these things off, put 0 on that. So that we have the foot pointing out, but still respecting the shape of the leg. So see how the foot is pointed in one direction, the knee is also pointed in the same direction. And another thing as well, so okay, I've moved the foot, I've moved the knee. Now we can't leave things unmoved. What would also happen here with this kind of movement is we probably might have even more movement of the pelvis to the opposite side because we're trying to balance. And that's going to result in a bit more of a buckle on this knee, or something's going to happen with this knee, and we might have a little bit of we'll think, well, what's going to happen to this foot? This foot, I might feel a little bit of a tilt, some kind of reaction to that, something happening to it. It's not completely stationary still. But on the point of registration, I've set a key on that foot, and the foot hasn't changed. And one of the things that people tend to overlook a lot in 3D animation in particular is that they think about what's moving and don't think about what's not moving. And it's just as important to remember that something isn't moving as it is to find out that something is moving. So when you're setting a keyframe, it's just as important to set a keyframe on the non-moving foot as it is to set a keyframe on the moving foot. Okay? If you don't do that, you start to have what's called foot slippage, and the feet start to dance underneath the body, and it doesn't make much sense. So as I'm moving from here to here, so I've thought about all the different body parts and how they react to that movement. So I'm starting off here, I'm anticipating that movement, and then I'm moving it out to the side. But again, I'm going through and I'm thinking about every single body part. What does it do? How does it react to that movement? And what might happen next? Say we'll go up to frame 30. We might think about, well, yes, I've got my foot out to this position here. I'm about to touch, and when I actually touch the ground might be a good next position to think about. So what's happening as I touch the ground? My pelvis is it touching first? Do I touch the ground and then my pelvis moves across? Pretty much. There's a slight movement in my pelvis. I have to move my pelvis across. I have to have this rotation across, but I'm not going to have a complete shift of my weight. In a way, what we're getting there is a rotation across there, across like a beam pole sitting on a post that's just flipping across on its pivot point. So if I had this pen sitting there and let it fall. That's what my pelvis would be doing. It would just be falling until my foot hits the opposite side. Thanks for the background sound effects. So let's again start from the thing which moves the most and move that across to a position where we think that it might touch the ground. And then try to imagine the arc of what that's doing and just think about how that would arc across to about there and then adjust everything else accordingly. But notice that I'm not moving the foot. And as I said before, it's really important to go through every single part of the body and adjust to make sure that everything does something. You don't want to you don't want anything to not move. And one of the classic beginners, the I'm a beginner thing in animation is to have just the wings moving but the dragon stays bolt still, or have the head move to the side and the body stays absolutely still. You want to make sure that everything is still breathing and everything is alive. So here, if I'm just reaching the ground there, I might think, well, let's see what this rig can do. Let's try and bend the foot so that there's a bit of contact on there. So let's have a look at the foot tilt. No, heel ball. This might allow me to get some contact. So let's push that down. And I'm not sure if this will allow me to twist. Okay, that's good. It gives me a bit of twist. Not a hell of a lot, but something which is going to give me a feel as though that foot is about to contact the ground. Now, it's a really important feeling of force that when we're about to contact something, if we're heading towards something, if my hand is heading towards this wall here, if you want to make it a powerful impact, you can't just go like this and then have the impact like that. One of the tricks that you can do with animation is to have the body part half bent. So in this case it's our foot half bent, and then slam it shut. And that's going to give you a nice hard impact. But it helps to define the contact really well. So here what I'm trying to do is to get this tip of the foot here to rotate in a way that I can with a rig, and you're always at the mercy of what the rig can and cannot do. But this is kind of getting towards what I was after. Wanting some kind of contact with the ground in a forceful way. And now we can go back and see what's happening here. So I'm taking my step to the side, and that's our initial point of contact. Now the two things that I wanted to make sure about as I transfer to the side here was that not just do I have the most important thing, which is the foot moving, but also work your way through the chain. My foot's moved, what has my knee done? Well, I want to make sure that my knee adjusts as well, and that it respects the shape of my leg. And what about my pelvis? Is what my pelvis is doing. My pelvis is, again, it's adjusting and coming through with a bit of an arc. You may want to even pull this down a little bit more so that it's on its way across. Now, you can't have it fully across because all it's doing at the moment is it's just rotating over on one foot to the other. And here we have registration in action. What is registered in this scene? Remember the word registration? Registration means contact. Contact means it's stuck to something. What is stuck and is not moving? Okay, it's that one foot. So here we've got our anticipation, we've got our reach. Now the reach has the counteraction on the hips, the contact, and at all stages it's not just my foot, it's everything else inside the entire chain. My pelvis does something, My opposite knee should do something as well. It's always a good idea to have some kind of movement on every single part of the body. So here, the weight has started to shift across a bit. Let's think, well, maybe I can tilt the weight here a little bit. Let's have a look. The ball swivel. I might swivel the weight a little bit to that side. Let's do what I can do with the heel ball. I'm not ready to lift my weight off here, but I might start to tilt my weight a little bit, just ever so slightly to one side. So can you kind of feel that there's a bit of a shift across that foot? And this is what really is the difference between a boring animation and something which looks nice. It's just thinking about everything, not just thinking about what's moving. Okay, and then we progress to our frame 40, which would be the position after I've reached across, I've touched the ground, and then I shift my weight in an opposite sense. So I've got almost the reverse of the existing pose, where now I've gone from having a solid contact on the right foot to a complete contact on my screen right foot with the peel on my screen left foot, so that the other foot starts to come off the ground, but now I've got my weight definitely on the opposite leg. So I've put this across, and now I've definitely shifted all my weight over to the supporting leg on the right and taking the weight off the left foot. So that's, again, I'm not thinking about my timing, I'm just going to another position in space. I'll press S so that everything is remembered. I will make this foot a confident foot on the ground, so I'll make sure that that's flat. I'll type in 0 on the foot. Now, here's an interesting exercise in registration. You'd think that if I was to reset the foot here, that the foot would stay the same. Now watch this carefully, everyone. When I reset this foot, watch what happens to the foot. Do you see that? I'll do it again. Watch the tip of the toe. It pulls back. Okay? That is going to be a noticeable slide in the foot. So that's something we have to get good registration, you have to be very aware of things like that happening. So from frame 30 to 40, had I done that, watch what happens with the foot. It moves backwards, and there's no reason for it to move backwards. I want that foot on the front there to stay on the front there. So if that happens, and the rig doesn't really allow us to do anything better than that, what I generally find myself doing is creating another object, say a little sphere. Maybe not that little. Just some other little placement object, so I can have a good idea about what's happening with my registration. So I might just grab that little object like that and stick it in front of that foot, so I can see exactly where it is in that frame. So when I move to this frame here, and I want to get good registration, I make sure that it comes back so that we get good registration from that change from being on the tip of your foot to coming back to there. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but as long as it feels like it is staying in the same universe, then you get good registration. And that now puts my foot flat back onto the ground, and I can then think about what's happening with my pelvis. My pelvis then moves across over that leg. And I don't want to forget about my knee. My knee should be supporting itself. And this foot here should be doing something to escape the ground. So we're going to think about how it's going to lift off the ground. Think of the first of all, how it peels off the ground there. I'm just using these controllers here, the heel ball, and I might use this one here to lift the foot up and to tilt it to the side, and not to forget that I need to keep the shape of my leg right as well. If I'm lifting that leg off, Now that's perhaps a little high, so I might take that down a bit. It's perhaps a bit too exaggerated. So I might take that down as well. The heel ball might be a bit much, but just enough to give the feeling that it's lifting off the ground. So again, I'll press S to make sure that my entire pose is kept. And then I've got that shift. I've got the shift of weight. Now something here has happened. Can anyone see what's happened? I've been sloppy. I've got a nice contact on here, and yet this foot here is going all over the shop. And what's happening there is that I'd forgot to press S when I got to frame 30, so not everything about that foot is the same. That's the same foot as on frame 40. I'd forgot to set all the keyframes here. So what I can do is I can take the foot, which is the correct foot, frame 20. This is another interesting trick. I can middle mouse click and drag like I was copying, but instead of setting the whole body, I can just select one part, which is just the foot, and key that one. And I can select just that one there and just key that one. So now that one part stays the same, and then I can start pulling off. So we start to get a bit of an animation, and it looks all right, mainly because I've been thinking about everything and how it all fits together, all the different body parts. Okay, and we're getting towards our finale on frame 50, where we get back to our final position. So had I got now to this position where I've put across, I've done that, and then I'd come back again. Don't make the mistake of coming from here straight like a soldier. We're going to come back to here. We're going to get to a position where we've maintained our weight. We're a little bit over the opposite side, and then we come back down again. Okay, we don't instantly get into the balance position. So from frame 50, again, I'll make sure I set everything on frame 40. On frame 50, I'll make my pelvis come across so that it supports its weight. Not just supports its weight, but also goes beyond. Make sure that I keep my leg in the nice shape. And the other, leg looks a bit weird now. Let's just get rid of any odd rotations. Make sure that's on the ground, and I'll have the weight up a bit, the knee in a good position, and the next thing that's important is that we get this foot across. So I'll just move it across, make sure that everything is in a good position. Oh, it's the body, the upper body that's weird. That's why I was just wondering, why is it twisting like that? Okay, because I've been doing the root. Okay, we'll just ignore that for the moment. I'll have to counter animate that. But the weird twisting in there is because the upper part of the body needs to be in that set down there, the pelvis. Can't be in a different set, but that's just my oversight. But that's our next frame where we've got the adjust to the imbalanced position. I'll notice that the weight is clearly over that foot, and that foot is about to be set down. And we'll finish this up on frame 60. I'll press S and put that foot, that's the thing that's moving the most, and I'll get rid of the different rotates that are on it. And have it just sitting on the ground. So that's flat to the ground there, and then have my body adjust itself back and make sure that we've got the knees and everything in more or less the right direction. Again, I've got a bit of a twisted pelvis there, but that's from something else. But there is the mechanics of the movement. So we're thinking in all times about how things start, how do we get there, and how do we adjust. And I feel at the end that that final movement is perhaps not enough. I could possibly have gone a bit further. So there's more of a feeling of an adjust at the end. And possibly even putting the weight over one of the feet and not the other one. That's another interesting pose that you can sometimes do. Is that we generally don't have our weight on both legs. We'd have it on one but not the other. So if we have more of that weight supporting on that side, then it might look a bit more natural. So I'm definitely shifting and then down a bit. Okay. So that would be the way that I would go about planning some kind of animated motion, making sure that you always think about not just what's moving, but everything else as well. We're thinking about how the body reacts, how the body adjusts, and how the whole system works together as one complete unit to create some kind of movement. Now, all that's left here, really, this is the I'd say 80% of the whole work done. All that's left now is for us to say, well, what about the timing? In fact, the timing isn't that bad. I'm not that displeased with the timing, but if I wanted to change the timing of this, because I'm using a character set, I can select keys and I can move them. And the way I selected that was a hold down shift, left mouse click and drag, and then move keys backwards and forwards. So if I wanted to have a really slow anticipation and a quick movement, I could start by, say, selecting all these keys first and make the first key take, say, 20 frames instead of 10. And then make the last key take twice as many frames. So I'm just adjusting that so that the initial anticipation is a lot slower, and the movement is quick, but then the final adjust is slow. And all this sort of stuff is going to change the way that the movement feels. And it already has changed something about the character of that movement. It has more trepidation about it. It's like, should I do it? I'm not sure. And then say you wanted the middle bit to be quite snappy, what you can do is we can select those middle bits and retime those ones. So select those keyframes in the middle, holding down shift, middle mouse clicking and dragging, and then putting that one in a bit there. So I've got a very slow anticipation and then a jump. Okay, so again it changes the character. But the movement is there. So the most important thing is about getting the kind of movements right and getting the weight right with those movements, and then the character will come when you try to do the timing. And I think that's probably enough for the moment because it's a lot to absorb, and recording for a full hour.